Coastal erosion is one of those topics that, let's face it, most of us don't even think about or discuss at all, let alone on a daily basis. But there are some key individuals in Louisiana that are analyzing the effects of coastal erosion on the state, on its wetlands, on its citizens, to better determine what's the best way forward in terms of protecting our coastline, because it is an essential part not only of the way people live but our economy in Louisiana. So this is a really important subject to discuss. Blaise Pezzold is with us. He's going to join us in a second here. Oh, and one more thing, the episode does end kind of abruptly. That's just the way things went when we did this episode. Unfortunately, we had some technical difficulties, but regardless, it's still enjoyable. It's definitely worth a watch, and stick around because it's coming up right here on the Rainy Cajun.
All right, folks, welcome back. Welcome back to the Rainy Cajun podcast. One of the topics that have always been, I guess has been around, I know since Jeremy and I have been young, has been the subject matter of Louisiana coastal erosion. And we always hear about losing, it's either like a football field or 3 football fields a day. I think I've been hearing since I was a kid. And so one of the folks that I met over the last few years through my various interest in preserving Louisiana, actually trying to recreate Louisiana in my home in Mobile, is Blaise Pezzold. Blaise is the, I guess now, maybe not at the time, but now you are the, make sure I get it right, Director of Coastal and Environment at the Meraux Foundation, and also Chairman of the Crescent City Soil Water Conservation District. Welcome, Blaise, to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, David and Jeremy.
Growing up as kids in the area, you heard about coastal erosion. You heard about the things that were going on. I remember being a member of the Cub Scouts, and one of the things we would do is we would collect Christmas trees at the end of the season, and then supposedly those made their way to the shores and were, I guess, a measure to at least somewhat slow down the erosion process. But it sounded, when we were growing up, I mean, we're all kind of 60s, 70s kids. I mean, it's been like this our entire lives. And as David mentioned, the measurement of a football field or 2 per day disappearing. And I feel like, we're still there where we were when this was all being discussed as young children. I mean, I thought by now the Mississippi River would be knocking on the back door of, Algiers Point, and, we would be, halfway underwater. And that hasn't happened. And I'm sure a lot of it is due to the efforts of people like yourself and the organizations that you work with. But I mean, where are we? And, if you were to snapshot today, and just in terms of an erosion from when you were young and when we were younger to where we are now, how is it? Is it an accelerating process? Is it kind of an inconsistent, constant process, or what? How would you describe the erosion or the things that have been happening right now, so people can get a better sense of this? Because I honestly don't believe that people will. I mean, this is my personal opinion, but I know that just the way people are, they don't really care until it's affecting them directly. And so, we just don't see that. And so I'm just kind of curious, your take on this, the state of the coast at this particular point in time.
It's up and down. Is the easiest way I would say it. I was introduced to our issues in the late '90s by my pawpaw. He took me fishing for specks out in Lake Bourne, and was like, "Look at the erosion here. This is going on all over the coast." I think we're kind of like at the, as far as human projects, we were doing really well. I think the cancel of the Mid-Barataria is a black eye. But we've built some of the largest coastal restoration projects in the world right now. The Biloxi Marsh Living Shoreline, which is a giant oyster reef in St. Bernard, is the largest in the world. We built the largest habitat restoration dredge project in the world. The Hong
Mhm.
Kong airport and those islands in Dubai are larger dredge projects, but they're not for habitat.
Right.
So we've set these like global marks, right?
Mhm.
Um, the I think our barrier islands that we've been rebuilding, we've done an excellent job at that. I think we've got really good at marsh creation, but canceling Mid-Barataria, that was going to be another feather in our cap of like world firsts, and
Mhm.
it's kind of a backslide to the kind of old school Louisiana politics stuff, and I'm not going to go deep into it, but I'll just say the way it was done was really dirty and what
Dirty
nothing.
and politics in Louisiana. I've never heard those two used in the same sentence before.
Yeah, yeah. You know, I don't know how to describe it without saying
So,
really negative things. I'm just gonna
yeah.
keep moving on. But and we have the chance to do another large first, and this is, we're looking at the Chandeleur Islands to build a sand motor type um, barrier island restoration, which that's a concept the Dutch came up with, and
Okay.
we're gonna do that, but we're gonna do it in a massive way compared to what they're doing there in the Netherlands. And before Mid-Barataria, the Dutch had come here and looked at our river model, looked at everything we've been working on, and they said, the teacher has become the student. That was their reply to us, and I thought, man, we
Wow.
are the stratosphere. We are gonna, like when I think of Louisiana, and you guys are all from here, I always thought like, oh, we do we do like seafood, we do oil and gas, but when you really look at it, we're water builders. We are, we construct things on water. We build in flood zones. We can do what nobody else in the world can do, and or if they do it, it's like on a much lower like technological level, and that is exportable. And you've seen that exported for oil and gas over the years. You've seen that now with like offshore wind, we're exporting that. And so the coastal sector to me is just an extension of all of that. And it's different. It's not energy, but it's something we're going to have to deal with, like living in and whether you believe climate change exists or not, it does, and it is a problem, and global seas are rising. And so whether you are in northern Germany or the Netherlands, or you're in West Africa, um, you're probably in an area or China, you're probably in an area that's a flood zone, and that is
Mhm.
going to see problems that we have here already, that we have solutions for, that we can export our people to keep our economy running and thriving, really. So
That's an interest. I didn't think about that aspect of it, but um, because I'm familiar, sort of like you said, like with the airport project, I've seen that on some of the History Channel shows, and of course, Dubai stuff's all over the place. And
yeah.
but I've heard about like the Netherlands. So I guess one of the questions when you were talking that maybe I was thinking about was, is the whole Louisiana coast from Texas to Mississippi, is the erosion the same, or is it more pronounced toward Mississippi and the Mississippi River?
That was something that when y'all asked the question, I thought to myself, I probably should delineate this, that the they're definitely not the same, but I'm not going to diminish the fact that Southwest Louisiana has their own problems that are a little
Mhm.
different from Southeast Louisiana, but they're the same problems, and
Mhm.
they are just as problematic for the folks down there, and just as dire as Southeast Louisiana. So we could go and say like, hey, Barataria Terrebonne is going to have the highest rates, period, because they
Mhm.
have no set of inputs. Um, Southwest Louisiana is a tiny little bit more stable than other places, but they have different problems with like um, if they get an inundation, right, and they get salt
Hmm.
water in there, and then they get a drought after an inundation, they're going to see saline levels build in some of these areas where water can't escape
Yeah.
to that you don't see on barrier islands. Um, to so it they're the things that kill their delta or their wetlands there are different from our things that kill, but their problems sometimes are even harder to solve in my
Hmm.
mind. But
Yeah, I guess.
in the
Yeah. Now I was
go
gonna
ahead.
say, I guess until you started talking about that, and I never, I've heard of it. Like I said, Jeremy was saying, since we've grown up, we've always heard about coastal erosion, but then in reality, when you got to break it down and realize that the coast is pretty big, even though Louisiana is a little smaller state, but it's got a considerable Gulf Coast. It's a third coast. Is a lot of folks that part of that whole Gulf Coast. But like you said, the terrain, even though it's similar, the losses are due to possibly different, or not possibly, but in reality due to different things. So it's not one solution fixes everything. You have to specialize into each of the causes, and so what you focus on in Saint Bernard may not be applicable because it's a different problem closer to Texas. So I never thought
Yeah.
about that. So I don't know how many people really think about that or realize that who, when we talk about Louisiana coastal erosion.
So just talking about Mid-Barataria, or not, I'm sorry, it's on the mind, front end of my mind. Talking about Barataria Terrebonne and talking about St. Bernard Parish where I live. St. Bernard has the Biloxi Marsh, which juts out, kind of in front of Mississippi, and it's a
Right.
massive area. And we're seeing the farther parts of it just kind of fall apart. And it's so far
Mhm.
out there that's like the last place people want to start when they start looking at a project. You're also in oyster grounds for people, so it can
Yeah.
be kind of like tiptoeing through a minefield because you don't want to upset the folks trying to make a living out there. But
Right.
that's of the Biloxi Marsh out here is very similar to the outer parts of like say like Cocodrie and the lower parts of Terrebonne Parish where it juts
Hmm.
out and in somewhat kind of mirrors Lafourche as well, to where you're getting just kind of it looks kind of like when you get crushed ice in a Coke and
Hmm.
it's got those little bits left. That's how I would describe that scenario. And in that scenario, your best bet is to do some sort of oyster reef if possible. But you have to, constructing something like that is a very expensive project. And when you're talking about that type of area, that's a massive uh, piece of real estate, and so it's I'm not going to quote numbers because we're not really quoting a certain area, but like
Right.
it's substantial and it's not a easy quick kind of thing.
Mm.
And yeah, and when you're talking about those kind of numbers, there's so many needs all across the bottom of the state.
The I guess to that point. So I remember the first time I really heard about it. I think it was 1980. There was on PBS had Nova, the old science show, and it was
Oh yeah.
called Goodbye Louisiana, and uh, and so I know that was probably filmed in the late '70s, and so did. When do you think, or maybe precisely when coastal erosion or conservation started really becoming a thing where people were really trying or realizing that there was losses? Because I mean, like I said, we can say it goes at least back to the '70s, but I imagine that some people, I guess, when the oil industries and all came in, maybe people started noticing, or I don't know. Because I guess the other aspect would be is how much time people spent around in the marshes and all that to even notice things were disappearing.
Yeah, I think and much like that documentary you're talking about is most likely the old timers, talking
Mhm.
about, well, this used to be here and that used to be there, and I've watched it fall apart, and this oak tree that I know is now a skeleton, and um, I think you probably had folks sounding the alarm for that often. Interestingly, the when folks talk about a football field today, that's built on a 100-year average. And we have maps, and I think they're with USGS, that go back to like the 30s, and you can see it.
Okay.
You can see the canals cut. You can see the kind of as the decades progress, and there's a trying to remember the name of the website, but I think it's either USGS or EPA, if those websites still exist.
Hmm.
They had a thing where you can, or like a map where you can take the bar and kind of run it along the timeline,
Time.
and
Yeah.
it'll show a newer map in that same area, and
Hmm.
maps, and you can watch it in kind of real time fall apart over the decades, which is really sad to watch. But
Yeah.
I try. There's a lot of stuff out there about what we've lost, how we've lost it. And you could take a deep dive on that. And it's kind of like watching, it's kind of like the part in The Fifth Element where the lady in it watches everything really fast. And yeah,
Yeah.
you'll get,
Yeah.
um, I try not to like dwell on that. There's a lot out there with that. And I
Hmm.
I really focus on trying to kind of build coalitions with people, organize folks that are doing kind of similar things and get them to coordinate, and then in um, my own projects, I'll try to, if I can, if I can go get bathymetry somewhere, which is measuring the bottom and seeing how deep it is, to
Hmm.
spark a project, or I can send a map that says, hey, this is what locals in my area think should be done, and I send that to a federal or state agency, or even the parish. That's the kind of things that I know can like spark something, and
Hmm.
I'm never afraid to take a flyer on something that is it's a need, or something that people want. So.
Yeah. So how, and when you deal with talking to people in public or maybe even political, I guess, officials, whoever, the further away you live from the coast, do they realize, do they think about what the impact it has losing the coast? Because, Jeremy and our ancestors are up from in St. James Parish. So that's pretty far inland, but I know that there is still a lot of swampland and through Lake Pontchartrain and all that you can get pretty far in there. But I mean, if you get further in, like Alexandria and some of those places, do they, they may not think it affects them, but I mean, obviously we think about the seafood industry, and then there's also the shipping industry up and down the Mississippi River. Um, but are there other examples that you could share or think of that, that may be impactful where people aren't realizing these losses and what they could affect them or how they could affect them?
Well, I went to Nicholls State University. I'm a culinary degree from there, and I
Hmm.
graduated in '05, and literally, 3 months later, Hurricane Katrina hit, and I remember being, um, I had went and I did disaster catering for the storm, for all the linemen and
Hmm.
the tree cutters. And then I had some time off after months of doing that, and I went to Flanagan's, right near Nichols campus, and it was a guy who was a state politician and another old timer in the bar talking, and I don't think these guys have ever said anything nice about New Orleans before, but when I had been around the bar, but they were, and maybe they didn't have a negative feeling about New Orleans or whatever, but they that day I overheard them talking, and they were like, you know what? The problem is this, New Orleans is underwater, and that affects our economy here in Thibodaux, regardless of whether we want it to or not. And I lived up in Monroe for part of my life, and I know kind of attitudes in North Louisiana are often, well, South Louisiana gets everything, or New
Right.
Orleans gets
Right.
we can't get this, horse arena we want, or the,
Hmm.
this little tiny thing we're asking for, and they just got, folks think that they're not tied in with everything, but ultimately, like ports in Louisiana are all kind of connected. I
Hmm.
think it's the largest port system if you connect them all up in the world. We have five major ports in the city or in the state, and they all rely on each other at some point. So if one is down, or one section of the state is down, it affects everything.
Hmm.
And I think there's a huge divide, like, Catholic versus Protestant from one end of the state to the other, but
Right.
ultimately it's one state, and it works, like we're more likely to, there's times where we're connected more to southern Mississippi or southern Alabama or East Texas, but
Right.
ultimately it all kind of rolls back into here, and we're in the same boat, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
Literally, a lot
that
of times.
that's something that's, it's hard for people to understand in a place like Monroe, but
Right.
you the other thing to it is, um, Monroe is, it might be above sea level, but it is flood prone to no end. There's so many places there I know have flooded before and possibly
Hmm.
could flood, and when that happens, the state's, got to come in and help. The feds got to come in. Oh, sometimes at some point the feds will come in and help. Maybe, I don't know.
Maybe.
Uh, I didn't have much confidence after Katrina, and it's
Yeah.
my confidence is waning even more now.
Sure.
So I feel for the folks up in North Carolina.
Yeah.
Um,
But I wonder if some of the techniques and things that y'all have learned, even though they may not be applicable, say from a like oyster reefs per se, but maybe there's some transferable knowledge that can be used for certain flooding and certain other erosions that occur and losses throughout the state too. And well, not just Louisiana, but throughout the America and like you've already pointed out, the world.
yeah,
But being further inland.
the Nature Conservancy has been doing some amazing, like, large scale projects. They have one north of Monroe, and then they have one that is in Mississippi, kind of in the floodplain there. Um, I want to say north of Natchez, but it's Loch something. I'm not involved in it, but I've just seen it kind of from afar, and those really, those kind of thoughts of leaving places for the river to flood when it needs to flood, or being able to connect back in with floodplains, and kind of rebuilding the lungs of the Mississippi River is I think it's a great idea,
Yeah, I see
to
that.
kind of reverse some of the damage we've done to the river system.
Hmm.
That brings me to something pretty interesting that I always wanted to talk to you about more, was
Sure.
river.
River
Um,
shrimp.
yeah, so you know, river shrimp migrate up the Mississippi River. They kind of have dwindled over the years, because those
Right.
floodplains in the north have been disconnected. But
Hmm.
I know you guys are St. James guys, and what do y'all? This is y'all's interview. I shouldn't be asking you questions,
That's
but
fine. Go ahead.
I
It's a
always wanted to
conversation.
have this conversation.
Yeah.
uh, what do y'all know and think about river shrimp? And I know them from culinary class, from
Right.
Chef Jeremy saying, "Hey, talking about shrimp. It was shrimp and corn bisque, and he was saying that folks had always told him river shrimp was sweeter than bay
Yeah.
shrimp, and I was, flabbergasted that there was another type of shrimp that lived in the river." And
Hmm.
so I was always like, man, I want to taste that. I want to eat that.
Yeah. So I have still yet to taste them. And Jeremy, I don't know how much background you've heard because I don't remember our grandparents talking about it on the Hubble side. But
No.
my mom has memories that when she was her grandparents uh, were Sanjis, and they lived in Edgard. And so she tells a story when she spent like a week during the summer when she was young, how she went up there and she remembers her grandmother, I guess was it number three wash bucket or whatever thing, wash tub type of thing, getting these river shrimp. And as a kid, when I lived outside of Houston. I was born outside of Houston, and then there was a part Cypress that we had a creek nearby, and when we were playing around, we found a bunch of these little tiny clear shrimp. So I'd catch them and we'd bring them to my parent, show my parents, and that's when they started telling me about river shrimp. Which the pictures I've seen they're actually bigger, but she would talk about her grandmother catching the shrimp, or not her catching them, but peeling the shrimp, and they were smaller. But then she would use them to make butter beans and shrimp recipes, or I know they used them in gumbos. And then I've heard Chef Foltz talk about it oftentimes when he had his radio show, um, that he would, just how they were sweeter and all this is what they always say. But there's always, I think you have to catch them sometime. I think it's around Father's Day or something when the river's high. But over the years, I know that they would put out the boxes with cottonseed meal, maybe, or some type of maybe rinds from like squash or some type of vegetation. And you'd put them out off the banks of the Mississippi in kind of these boxes, and they'd get caught, trapped, and then they'd bring them in, and they'd have many many pounds of it, and that's what they would use that far inland. But since that time, uh, John's brother, Raleigh, I think his oldest brother, who's probably in his early 80s now, he was one of the last people still doing the river shrimp. And their younger brother, Jerry, and Jerry's son, Jay, actually are continuing on that river shrimp tradition now. So, but the quantities are not what they once were. And some people have attributed it to pollution in the river. Others have attributed to um, the dredging of the river to make sure that you always have the clear waterways. Some people talked about how you could see I'm sorry, I'm getting confused also with the catfish story. But when you've seen the pictures or been out there, probably in your case, where April, May, when you get those spring floods, the river's up pretty high. And I think that as that river's high or as it's dropping is around the time that they would go out. But a few years ago, I had contacted Don Dubuque and suggested that his show Bayou Wild TV, that they interviewed John's brother Jerry, and they took him out, and he did a whole episode on that. So if you hadn't seen that, I could send you the link to it.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, I'd love to see
But
that.
I think that there's a few. So either I think the way it stands now is you either have to know somebody who does it, and then let them know or be around. I think Hemel's restaurant that closed maybe 5 or 6 years back, maybe it's just more recent than that. In was that in Convent or no? Somewhere right around there. Um, they used to have it on their menu every so often when they do boiled shrimp.
Hmm.
Um, but no, I've heard about it and I've wanted to try it. So, um, not that I have a bucket list, but it would be on my bucket list if I could get an opportunity to try it sometime. So,
Makes sense. I know I worked with Milton LeCompte when I first started working in coastal restoration, and he was still making traps back in 2011, I think.
mhm.
But I haven't talked to him forever, and yeah, it's been a long time. And
Yeah,
it's cool stuff. Hope it comes back.
yeah. There's some. I'm sure you've seen the videos on, like you said, where they'll go upstream. I mean, upstream, upriver to to spawn, and then come back down. And I think I found a map one time that even showed that they should be even in the Mobile Delta somewhat, but I'm not familiar with anybody around here getting those type of shrimp and trying them. So
That's cool. Yeah, their migration from what I saw went all the way to Ohio and
Yeah.
like the or
Wow.
like kind of Illinois and Iowa kind of areas. So I
Hmm.
was kind of just like, wow, never
Yeah.
thought I'd think of shrimp in Ohio, but
Yeah. When I was visiting my brother in Kansas, probably about 10 years ago, we were actually in Kansas City, Missouri, and my wife was eating some type of pasta, and it had some shrimp in it. And she gave one to me, and I'm eating it, and I'm like, I had this moment where I'm like, holy crap, I'm so far inland, and where did the shrimp come from? Which I know that was it's probably a foreign shrimp, but yeah, just that knowing where you are type of thing, and thinking it just didn't make sense to be eating something like that here. So, um, but yeah, I mean, like I said, I definitely that's one of the things we would like to definitely learn about more. I think is helping preserve that as well, and that's I guess that's also another point of coastal restoration in other ways. Just thinking about also the tributaries and the river itself, and things that have changed amongst it, even though it looks robust and um, flowing strong. I mean, even I think drought periods, the river itself, it's with like a foot. I mean, it didn't have a pretty low level the last couple of years, Mississippi.
yeah, we've seen droughts and the river kind of is never, this constant. We would hope it would be for like shipping and things like that and safety of our of cities along it. But really
Hmm.
it's more like that kind of up and down blip thing that you would see on a chart or um yeah, it's never the same every year.
Hmm.
We have really high years and really wet years, and then we have years that are really low and dry. And there is a sediment deficit on the river. We have much less sediment that comes down, but we also have hundreds of locks and dams that are upriver from us,
Yeah.
and then a lot of those dams that are on the Missouri River that are, that's the more sediment laden tributary.
Hmm.
um, those are older dams that are going to have to be replaced. So hopefully, as those get replaced, that sediment is released to come downstream, and we'll see a little bit of an uptick as those come offline, and then they build newer ones. And supposedly, from what I've learned, they have newer dams that allow sediment to bypass them as well, so that they
Yeah.
don't have that lifetime or lifespan on a dam.
I think when you said that, it reminded me of back to the river shrimp. I think that was one of the other problems with the locks and dams. There's certain ways that they don't allow, either they can't get further up to, like you said, to Ohio, or and so maybe some of the more, I don't, maybe environmentally friendly isn't the exact right term, but ecologically improved ways of doing that, like you said, allow certain natural things to continue while still managing the water levels. Maybe don't we can improve upon that, and so that the biological aspect of it and the uh, ecological aspects still are preserved, or maybe even return to once what they once were, while still maintaining some water issue concerns for transportation. Um, yeah, like I said, start talking about it and start and never really think about some of those aspects until you really dive deeper into it. Um, are there particular industries? Because we've already talked about seafood and oil and gas, but is there any from the coastal conservation standpoint? Are there any particular industries that have been big supporters or um, sponsors of a lot of the things that y'all do, or is it mostly government support or nonprofit?
Um, so one thing to point out, like the Meraux Foundation doesn't take money in.
Okay.
We expense or we fund things that benefit St. Bernard Parish, and we have a bunch of different pillars of that we try to kind of hang our hat on: education, the elderly, young people, and food insecurity, the arts, and then the environment is a big one. and that's really kind of where I fall in. And then we also we like to dabble in agriculture as well, because our headquarters is Dockville Farm down in Violet, and so we don't take any money in. But we often, what we'll do is kind of throw our weight behind people that we think are doing something good, um, so there's a lot of nonprofits in our area that are doing vegetation projects and like tree planting and things like that. And a good kind of, for instance, is the Central Wetlands Reforestation Collective. So we got in a room with all the folks planting trees in the Central Wetlands, which is kind of the Central Wetlands goes from the Ninth Ward all the way down to Verret in St. Bernard Parish. It's I think it's over 30,000 acres. Used to be a cypress and tupelo swamp, the majority of it. And when they cut the Mississippi River Gulf outlet, which was a
Mm-hmm.
shipping channel, they cut that in the 50s, and it immediately killed the cypress swamp there. So they've closed it post Katrina, and these different groups were working in the same general area but not coordinating. So we had a meeting to kind of coordinate and get everybody on the same page and
Mm-hmm.
share apps, share ideas, share thoughts, maybe grievances. Sometimes there's grievances, and
Yeah.
CPRA, the state coastal protection agency, showed up, and they said, "We really love what all of y'all are doing. Um, we have a partnership grant that we want you to apply for, and the only kicker is you have to apply as a group." So we had to come up with a name, which we came up with Central Wetlands Reforestation Collective, which is a mouthful. We call it Quirk.
Yeah. Okay.
And it comprises us, the Meraux Foundation, Common Ground Relief in the Ninth Ward, CSED in the Ninth
Mm-hmm.
Ward, Pond Stream Conservancy, and Coalition to Restore Coastal Louisiana. And so we applied for it, we got it, and then we applied for another grant that CPRA pushed our way from NOAA, the feds, and
Mm-hmm.
got about $1.2 million to plant 30,000 trees, 33,000 marsh plugs. And this is, basically we're doing restorative work on this point, like repairing after that channel was cut. And it's not something where it's something where we all basically have to work together, which is really,
Mm-hmm.
I think, the big kind of lesson learned there was like, hey, you guys should work together rather than fight with each other, or
Yeah.
have pity or whatever. and
Right.
uh and it's working. But so that's a good example of who usually funds things, and it's to be honest, it's usually the federal government, or it's penalties from the BP oil spill, or it's state funding. Those are the major funders that are out there. So BP oil spill has funded a lot of those really large projects I was talking about earlier, like the Biloxi
Right.
Marsh Living Shoreline and the Lakeborne Marsh creation. Um, but QIPRA, which is the Bro Act, was established over 30 years ago, that's been the major constant funder over the years. And that's, I don't want to say a figure, but the regular size of a project would be like a 30 to $40 million project.
Wow.
With QIPRA.
So a lot of what you're talking about, because I think I've also heard from some of the other things I've seen and followed you doing, uh, the there's a lot. Like I said, everybody's got to work together to, and like I said, y'all are tackling just a portion of the area along Louisiana, trying to do what you can. Um, and I think one of the things I was thinking about is that, because I always hear about St. Bernard Parish and it's a lot of the Isleños that had settled there, and the rich history and traditions. Um, because there's a lot of oyster farming there, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess if you live there or came from there, you see the immediate loss of what's happened due to it benefit, cutting that channel through there benefited others in some ways. Because I'm sure you've read the book, oh shoot, it's Dr.
Rising Time.
Draining New Orleans, I think is what it's called. Um, or I forgot the guy's name. But he's a Tulane professor, a geology professor, and he talked about the whole events of trying to take South Louisiana using the wood screw in New Orleans and New Orleans East, and some of the ways reclaiming the land, like you were talking about earlier. A lot of things we've done, the state has done, excelled at as reclaiming land and doing that, but sometimes probably don't always realize when you make some of these improvements that in reality, if you don't think them out far enough, uh, natural settlement of grounds versus over thousands of years versus in a decade or so, things don't really go the way you expect. So while you try to make an improvement on one end, you may be doing it at the expense of something else on the other end, and we don't really realize that. Sometimes it's more immediate, like you said, all the trees dying and such, versus maybe it takes a decade or so to realize something's happening. So um, I guess along those ways, people start to realize that how it impacts their lifestyle and their traditions and such. Um, so I assume that y'all must have a lot of good, hopefully, community support from the people trying to preserve history and culture in the area.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, I sent a letter yesterday to Bill Highland asking for a letter of support for a project I got going down in the Reggio area. My family is actually on my dad's side is Isleño. They're Solis and Sejas
Okay.
and I think we're related to the and Dominguez, but we're related to like the Rodriguez's and yeah, you name it, Isleño's name, and we're all kind of
Mhm.
connected.
Yeah, I know the Rodriguez's. I didn't think it. I think the Rodrigues upriver is all goes back to the same branch. So I think I've got some of that far back. I have to remember it's been a while, but yeah. So there's that element too. That yeah, because like I said, I mean, as you study the culture, and I know you did especially in the culinary school, and you learn about the diversity of Louisiana cooking, and tying it back to the seven nations as John Foles talks about. Then you also see that each subgroup. I mean, because I'm sure gumbo from Saint Bernard Parish is different from a gumbo in Vacherie or gumbo in Lake Charles or something like that. So I know that certain things impact that. So like I said, just tying all that into thinking about how, even though on one surface it looks like you're just trying to preserve something from deteriorating or land loss on one hand, then you start really moving out to the whole environment and the whole ecology and the things. Because I guess the other thing people don't think about is like, didn't you talk about on one of your interviews that isn't there also a bird migration path along that way that has been lost or could be lost?
We have we have the Mississippi River Flyway here, and
Mhm.
then our like so Grand Isle has a maritime forest on it, and then
Okay.
if you look at like any of our high ground in southeast Louisiana, there it's called live oak hackberry or live oak levee forest is another name for it. Basically, it's what we would see live oaks and hackberries in, and would consider high ground. All of that gets cleared out except for the live oaks as humans come through, and that's been an issue. I think probably since European colonization of Louisiana, but it impacts the trans-Gulf migratory birds that fly from the Yucatan to here, because the first thing that they do is they go eat insects and eat berries in those types of forests, whether it's whether they're coming down from the Mississippi River Valley and they're coming through, and this is their last stop before they go and eat and then fly to the Yucatan, or whether they're flying in the reverse from the Yucatan to here and they drop out the sky here and they hit the trees and then they're worn out, but they're looking for something to eat, and there's all the bugs and the berries in those types of forests and perches and a place to find shelter from the wind. And so it's a big deal, and it's very problematic. And I think conservation is needed within that live oak hackberry forest if we're going to continue to see migratory, trans-Gulf migratory birds come through here.
And I think the same thing you talked about also was isn't that also a birthing ground for some sharks too? One of the northern.
That's that's an interesting thing you bring up, because that's the Chandeleur Islands. So the Chandeleur Islands have the most northern population of black mangrove, the most northern population of lemon sharks, and a birthing ground there in the Chandeleurs. They also have a gull, like a seagull that's specific to that area, and then also a population of Kemp Ridley sea turtles that only genetically they're distinct from any other population in the world. They also have, I think, leatherback sea turtles nesting there, and maybe some other species. It's only been in the last 6-7 years that they knew they had sea turtles nesting there, because they're super remote islands and people just don't go out there. And it was
Yeah.
the historical records from sea turtles nesting in Grand Isle. There's ones I'm sure for chandelures, but as far as I knew when I graduated college in 2011, or in coastal from UNO in 2011, it was like sea turtles don't nest in Louisiana. Our barrier islands are too low. That's what I was told. And then it's just not true. you know,
Yeah.
it's a fallacy. And so the Chandeleur Islands, I think we have a huge opportunity there, especially if we build a sand motor type restoration rather than something more static. And I should probably explain a sand motor. The idea of a sand motor is that you have a barrier island chain. You have a process called longshore transport. So if you think about when you go to the beach, say you're in Gulf Shores or you're in Panama City or wherever you're at, Destin, and you get on a floaty, and 1 minute you're in one spot in front of your towel, the next minute you're 20 feet down the beach. That's longshore transport that just moved you. And what it is, the angle of the waves breaking on the beach. So they always come in at an angle, and that angle is pushing things to one way or the other down the beach. The sand motor takes advantage of that, and it finds, well, where is the top part of where this starts, that the longshore transport starts. And so in the Chandeleur Islands, it starts in the middle, and you can bring it to this middle area, and it'll go to the outer edges. So basically you're replenishing it right there in the middle, and they're looking at the science of this and which way to do it, engineering wise. But the idea is to put it at the top of the conveyor belt that's going to run it down to the rest of it. And the other part to it is barrier islands, with storms, they kind of roll over and build back and build wider, and the wider they are, the more lasting power they have, the more likely they are to make it through a storm and
Yeah.
recover. So adopting that approach versus like, hey, we're going to build this to an 8-foot high dune and it's got to be 300 feet wide or whatever, however wide it's supposed to be, is
Hmm.
very different. More of like a work with nature thing instead of like a
Okay.
set numbers that we use.
Yeah. Instead of
That's
man imposing his will on nature, so to speak, the other way around. It's
exact man
yeah. So
realized rules there.
yeah, the because I keep thinking when you're talking about, because I don't never spent really any time at the Chandeleur Islands, but I'm familiar with Dauphin Island right off the coast of Alabama, and so and I think what a lot of people don't, well, if they didn't think about it, but there's so many barrier islands along the Gulf Coast. And we really realized after, in our case, Ivan, which preceded Katrina, I guess, by a year. Um, my wife had lived down there partly when she was a teen. And, part of the island, you could be right in the middle of it. And with all the pine and oak trees around there, you don't realize you're on an island. And then you get out to the beach. But I guess I'm thinking it's the west end is the part that it's amazing to me. People build these houses that are nicer than my house in inland Mobile, and it's, to me, it's like you can see that the sands are going to be eroded, or the house will be eroded, and all that. But then after one of the hurricanes, there was a section where they actually either cut a pass or there was a new beach now all of a sudden, because the way the shifting sands and nature had reorganized things. Um, and so it just, like I said, in some cases it takes a few years. In other cases it can happen like that, where things change. And so I guess the positive to that is that if you can learn to work with nature, I guess you can kind of build back, and maybe it doesn't always take a long time, but maybe it'll take, what do you think? Is there a reasonable amount of time that you expect to see the regrowth or reestablishment from that process?
I assume would be within like a year or so you would start to see the
Yeah.
effects
Okay.
of it. I know when I went out to the Chandeleurs, I've only been once, and it's like you said, it's super hard to get there. The state, I think it was a state or a nonprofit, brought us out there to go look at it to kind of build momentum for this project. And um, one of the things that they talked to us about was that, hey, the Chandeleurs are out of sand at this point. There, you have shells all over the beach, and when you start to get, this is like actually one of my professors from UNO was telling us this, and he's Dr. Mike Miner, and he works for BOEM, and he's their sand and shell guy for Barrier Islands, and or sand deposit guys for Barrier Islands. And he was saying, once you get to this point where you're having shell deposited on the beach, it's pretty dire, and you're looking at
Wow.
in state, and you're going to look at blowouts from there, and you're going to look at just total collapse of the system. And so I think it's like in the nick of time, to be honest, that we're getting
Mhm.
involved out there. And when you think about it, you might think, well, oh, it's just a bunch of barrier islands. This is like the second wildlife refuge that Teddy Roosevelt established back in the day. So there's a significant
Wow.
amount of American history there. You have
Hmm.
all these species that this is maybe their farthest place north. Um, I forgot to mention there's seagrass there. It's only seagrass beds in Louisiana, and I think
Okay.
it's when you so environmentally, historically, it's important, and then when you're talking about the city of New Orleans and the greater New Orleans area, um, that's important to the American economy because of the Mississippi River and all of the goods that come in there. Um, so economically, even if you don't care about history, you don't care about the environment, you don't care about South Louisiana, economically, you don't want to deal with what happens if we don't have Chandeleur Islands and a storm surge comes through and hits the city of New Orleans, because you're going to deal with another. I can't actually. I shouldn't say an absolute. You're not. You don't want the possibility of another new Katrina on New Orleans.
Right.
It'll cost exponentially more at this point. and it'll be an enormous disruption to the economy of the U.S.,
Yeah.
whether it's steel or coffee or um, you name it that we ship through here. There's a lot
Mhm.
of goods and services moving through, so
Yeah.
that the U.S. economy relies on. So
Yeah.
some
I mean, like I
global.
said, yeah, it's really, like I said, it's really fascinating when you start digging into it. And because, I mean, like I say, we hear one thing as a kid, or in our case as kids, and you only think about maybe one small aspect, but then as you extrapolate through and you follow the thread, you start realizing all the impact that it has and the reasons to preserve uh, the coast and the islands, and just the what we're what we've grown up and even have lost in our lifetime to preserve and try to restore, because of the impact for not just us but for the future generations. And then, like I said, the impact it can have all the way to somebody in Cleveland, Ohio, for example, or someone in Detroit. I mean, you can figure out that there's a lot of impact through that. Is there anything that you can suggest, or places people who are watching, if they wanted to help or support, is there any places they could go to, uh, to either, whether it's donations or just other support, or get involved, that you could suggest where people could go?
Yeah, I think I would point back to my quirk partners. So Common Ground Relief, CSCD in the Ninth Ward, um, Pontchartrain Conservancy, and CRCL all are nonprofits. They take donations. They take volunteers. And that's something, like donations are great and they keep the lights on and they're super important. But a lot of times for projects, there's like a lack of volunteers, and I think that's something that is like an easy one to say, like, hey, I'm going to put my time into this, and I'm going to take my Saturday, or I'm going to take this weekday and take a day off of work and get out there and do something and feel good about it. And it does feel good. I think that's kind of what dragged me into this profession, was the feeling that I was doing something good in the world. So I would definitely recommend checking out those nonprofits, and either doing some sort of financial donation if you're way out of town, or if you are in town visiting, or you live here, which is even
Mm-hmm.
more important connection to make. We could always use volunteers, and there's always volunteer events through most of the fall, spring, and winter. Most folks take off for the summer because it's a little
Yeah.
brutal, and um, a lot of these nonprofits kind of mainly deal with vegetation planting. Um, some do other type stuff like oyster reefs and all. But yeah, those are easy ways to get involved on a smaller, like kind of local level. And then currently, this CPRA, our Coastal Protection Agency for the state, is doing the master plan, and the 2029 master plan, and you can submit project ideas if you are into that and live along the coast, or maybe you have a great idea and you want to throw it in there. They have a whole process for that. That's on their website. um, I think those are probably the easiest ways to get involved that I could think of.
Yeah, I imagine, because I've seen some of the pictures you've posted over the last couple of years, and I was thinking in terms of, and maybe it's along the, maybe I don't want to term it this way, but kind of on the fringes of eco travel. But I would imagine like the places that you get to go, especially as a volunteer. I mean, yeah, you can take a charter boat out and go fishing and see a lot of these things, but I mean, the places that y'all are going to go to and the work you're going to do is going to be something unlike what you could expect in a lot of places. And then you're going to, like, it's going to be probably difficult that anybody's ever going to say, yeah, I visited this spot exactly, because it's so either remote or hard to get to when y'all are doing a lot of that work. So that's a very interesting thought, as far as from the volunteer standpoint. I'll have to look and see. Of course, my problem is I got too many interests of things right now, and I'm not that far from you, but at the same time, but yeah, those would be good things. Like I said, we'll definitely, if you have any links that you want to send us on that, we'll post it in the description of the episode. I did have some other questions, but I know we're also getting close or really past the hour that we've already talked about. But Jeremy, did you have anything else you want to talk to about coastal restoration?
Yeah, definitely. With all this discussion, one of the things that we mentioned at the beginning was the fact that we've known about coastal erosion in terms of our experience learning about it in school and hearing about it on the news since we've been around. And I think the question becomes, what have you been able to see a measurable impact on the work that's being done to stem the tide, so as it were, of coastal erosion? Have you seen something like tangible results that are at least starting to slow the impacts? I mean, are we essentially just prolonging the inevitable, or is this something that can be truly stopped and in some cases reversed? Not to be dire about it, but I just because we've been hearing about it forever. I mean, I'm 52, and I've been hearing about it, and Louisiana's still there, and one of the things that I've noticed, especially with Louisiana politics, is that when you start messing with their money, that's when the politicians actually start to pay attention. And when it comes to impacting things like tourism and the economy surrounding seafood, and they start to realize that their tax base is going to be impacted by these types of things. Not to get political, I'm just saying this. That's when people usually stand up and pay attention.
Motivations. Yes.
Yeah. And so what you've been able to do to date, with or without their help, their support, is it having an impact that you can see? And then what do you think it's going to take for other people in the state to actually put some real effort behind this, and or is it even necessary at this point, I guess, or is everything kind of just copacetic and we're just dealing and we'll make it work? Well, what's your thoughts on that?
So, without getting too political, I will say that Quipra, I was saying that's been our big money thing for over 30 years, and they are going to continue to be that after the oil spill money starts to. It's already, we're on the downward curve of the oil spill money, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The agencies that are in Quipra, which are like USDA, EPA, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, NOAA,
Mm-hmm.
CPRA, and then I'm missing one, Army Corps of Engineers. All of the federal agencies have been dealing with cuts, have been dealing with people being retired forcefully or non-forcefully. And we've gone from agencies that had like 9 people that worked in this kind of sector to like 2 people left, or 6 people on staff, and they have 1 person left who, like when I send them an email and I say, hey, I don't want to make your day harder or cause you any problems, but how do I advance this project? They say, do what you want to do. I'm going to be here answering the emails and sending and making the phone calls, and I'll still be here, and I support whatever you do, but I can't do anything new. So that concerns the heck out of me.
Sure.
And that's not a political statement. That's a Louisiana statement.
Yeah.
And I've heard that from people from both sides of the aisle, that they're really concerned about that situation, and I don't care for it at all. Because I've seen a lot of really intelligent people, really strong people in the coastal sector have to retire or are sitting there going, I don't know where I'm going to go. My mortgage is due.
Yeah.
The guy who literally he and I got a Quipper project in last year for funding, and he had two in the state, which I've never heard of anybody getting two through at one time. He is looking for a job right now, like, and that's just ridiculous to me. The whole
Yeah.
situation.
Yeah.
And he was a blast to work with, and he was really good at what he did. Um, will you briefly repeat your question again? I think I
Yeah.
got my brain on one tangent.
Sorry.
About what I'm.
Yeah, see, I'm with politics as David is with Melaton. Yeah, so I look at you know, as far as the I can sidetrack conversations. I don't mean to, but I know that that does come down, especially with organizations like yourself or the ones that you work with. They rely
Yeah.
on government funding to operate, in addition to volunteer help and outside donations. But it just seems to me that sometimes politicians will put it on the back burner until it becomes a real problem and it starts to impact their tax base. And that's a sad reality of things, but you start messing around. It's like people have these memes about, you know, other countries messing with America's boats, and that's what you don't want to do. Because dire consequences are usually a result. But it's the same thing with the politicians, is that you start messing with their tax base or their money, their revenue, and then finally they'll pay attention. Maybe by that time it's too late. But I guess my original question was what do you see measurable impacts in the time that you've been working on this, and is this something that is just you're kind of managing the decay, the decline, or is it something that is reversible, or at least something that you can halt, I guess?
So the Mississippi River, like I was saying, or the Mississippi River has changed delta lobes so many times
Right.
that you're really managing delta lobes, and they're and then you have a number of factors of like what kind of life that delta lobe lived. So did they drink a lot? Did they smoke cigarettes? Which are like, you know, did they have a bunch of oil and gas fields across them? Did they have a ship
Yeah.
channel through it? Has there, you know, how many hurricane hits did they have? You're looking at those kind of factors, and so ultimately, like, it's unless it has a input from the Mississippi River or the Atchafalaya, it's a dying delta, and you're really thinking of like, okay, well, what is grandma or grandpa's, you know, or papa or mama's life care decisions that you're going to make? Do they need a stint? Is that the
Yeah.
number that they need currently, or do they need physical therapy because they've been in a fall? You know, like
Yeah.
that's more of the way I think about what is happening in a delta, you know, or
Yeah.
a delta lobe. Um, like I said, Southwest Louisiana is very different, the way it's built, and they have a totally different set of problems there. But you're always in kind of managing care for it unless it has an input from the river. As far as like tangible results, I've definitely seen you know, the Biloxi Marsh Living Shoreline. We well, I'll say NOAA and 4-H at Chalmette High School here in St. Bernard. We have a program where we're planting mangroves, and there's been a number of partners over the years. The Coastal Department. We had a guy who's a fly fisherman who actually started it, named Lucas Bissett, in his group called Able. But it's kind of us, NOAA, and 4-H are the core partners that have stuck with it throughout. But when we started, we were planting on the edge of Bay Elwha, and the first year we had, after we planted, we had a tropical storm come through, and that tropical storm just kind of ground the edge of the bay back, and we lost like 30 feet, and we found one mangrove left there, and
The following years, we did like a sort of an area planting and found that that bay edge was actually the best spot to plant, because when you have a storm come across the bay, it scoops out the bottom of the bay and then deposits it right on that edge of the bay. And we were like, well, this is the perfect spot to put them. This is a little bit elevated. They grow faster there. They're less stressed. But we were like, if another storm comes through, they'll be gone in a second. And then we noticed that they were building that Biloxi Marsh shoreline. So we went behind that, and there's less day-to-day erosion.
Right.
And then when the storm events come through, it can't just sit there and grind it up. So we planted there, and we had great success. And we've been planting along there. And now we've kind of coupled that together where it's like, okay, we have this artificial oyster reef. We know we're going to be safe behind it. Let's just max this out right behind it, right on this edge where they like it. And I think that's one where you have tangible results of like, hey, this is how this system was originally kind of supposed to work, and it hasn't been. And there's a lot of kind of instances like that. I can think of like the plug on the Mr. Go that keeps the salinity down. On the outside of the Mr. Go plug, it's 14 parts per thousand is the salinity, which is salty water you could grow oysters in. On the inside, it's 7 parts per thousand. That's just on the other side of that. Wow. So that's a 7 parts per thousand difference. That is the difference that allows us to plant those cypress and tupelo forests in the back of New Orleans and Chalmette and Airbnb here.